So just to introduce myself, my name is Erica Lee. I serve as the Assistant Director for Student Organization Development here at Clemson. I work for the new Center for Student Leadership and Engagement, formerly Student Involvement and Leadership. It's a lot of words, but it means that I get to serve student organizations like you and create programs, co-create programs like this with wonderful student orgs like Change. So my information is available later on, but if you have any questions at all, you can find me on the Clemson website. Again, my name is Erica Lee, and I'll be happy to help you with literally anything regarding your student organization. So Tim and Landon, would you mind introducing yourselves?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Tim Switzer. I am the current outgoing president of Change, and then I'm also one of the graduate assistants for the Rutland Institute for Ethics here at Clemson.
Hey, everybody. My name is Landan Hydrick. I am the oncoming president starting in the fall for Change. Like Tim, I'm also a graduate assistant for the Rutland Institute for Ethics. So kind of be taking over his position once he graduates.
Great. So we're just going to move on and get started. This will also be available later on at bit.ly/Clemson Leader to Leader, and also be sending out an email with that link.
Okay, so first, just as a really brief introduction for what exactly Change is. So Change is simply an acronym. It stands for Creating Habits and Norms Guiding Ethical Decisions. We serve as Clemson Student Ethics Committee, and our mission is to inform and educate students of Clemson University about the importance of ethical decision making and to encourage them to act as ethical leaders in their respective fields. So just to give you an idea of how Change is put together, we have at least one representative from all 7 colleges at Clemson. So whether that's a college of education, college of science, etc. And we conduct programming in each college every semester that relates ethics to that specific field. So ethics and education, ethics and agriculture, ethics and engineering, etc. And then we also plan at least one program every semester that we call our university-wide program, and that relates ethics to the university as a whole in more of a general sense, so that it's applicable regardless of whether you're an education major, a chemistry major, etc. So that's just a little bit about who we are. So when we're discussing ethical elections and officer transitions, the first question that needs to be asked is, well, first of all, why is ethics an important part of elections? And when you look at this question, there's really 3 main parts to that. The first of which is independence. So it's important to avoid conflicts of interest and to treat all parties fairly. You may be wondering, well, what exactly is a conflict of interest? What is an example of that? Just something that comes to mind that you've seen just throughout history several times. An example of a conflict of interest could be maybe it's a president or a prime minister, some sort of leading public servant, and if they were to make a decision that benefited themselves personally or a personal business more than, say, the public's interest, that would be an example of a conflict of interest. So that's one key part of ensuring ethical elections, is making sure there's independence. And then next is transparency. So your election process should be clear and known to everyone involved. And really the easiest way to do this is to just have all of the details about your election process in your Constitution. And that way there is no gray area, because a lot of ethical dilemmas occur in gray areas. So the more detailed and just clear and transparent something is, the less likely that a dilemma will arise. So having all those details in your Constitution that's just available for all members to view at any time just really ensures transparency. And then the next part is integrity. So officers should not be allowed to make decisions that are unchecked. So it's just important to ask yourself, is there someone else monitoring decisions that are being made? Do other people have a voice, etc.? And then another key part is competence. So it's important for the potential candidate to either have a background, experience, or interests that relate to that position. So if someone is applying for a position just because they want to maybe put it on their resume, and that's their only interest and the only reason why, they may not be the best officer. Officers should be leaders, and they should be people that either have a background, experience, or interests. And the reason why I say interest is because it's important to understand that no one gets experience until you're given an opportunity to get experience. So if you have, this is just another example that comes to mind, say a candidate running for the position of chief financial officer, and maybe they're a business major and they've never been in a role like that, but they have an interest and want to learn and grow and experience that, then that would be, in my opinion, someone who would definitely have a background that would be applicable to the position, and someone that would develop competence in that position. And then lastly is fairness. So it's just important to ask yourself, is your election process fair? Does it include anyone? And does everyone have equal access to vote? And then lastly, before we transition to the next slide, I just want to say that change is actually in the process of, we're going to begin the process next semester of really detailing our election process and how we transition officers. So we're going through this as well. So we just wanted to, we've been doing a lot of research into this, and just how to ensure elections are being held in an ethical way. So we wanted to share this research with you guys, and just walk through it with you guys. So we are right in the same boat as you, and we're also kind of figuring all of this out as well.
Okay, and I'm going to start with limiting potential bias during the ethical election process. So one thing to keep in mind is that first impressions can automatically create a bias. So when you're thinking about candidates running for positions, just kind of keeping that in the back of your head. And also, the fact that we tend to gravitate towards those that we like. So that piece of, picking favorites and stuff like that, trying to be mindful of that. The next big part is having awareness. So, thinking about some biases that you might have awareness over, and then actually being able to challenge those biases to reflect how they may affect the voting process. One, for example, may be somebody that has lied in the past, so having that bias against them because they're untrustworthy. So kind of, being aware of any type of bias you may have. The next up is, sometimes taking a blind approach to voting. So that would be listening to their message, their speech, or their statements, rather than just focusing on them as a person. So rather than looking at them based off of their gender, their race, their ethnicity, their major, their year of study, what have you. And then also, going back to those first impressions or those misconceptions that we may generalize, misconceptions of candidates can easily be cleared up by questions. So whether you have a whole debate, whether that's part of your process, or whether it's just a simple Q&A, that's one of the best times to, be able to hold leaders accountable. And then lastly, just remaining impartial is key during the election process. So having that general sense of fairness. Next slide. Okay. And then going into the voting for elections. So this is some research that I came across when looking at the best way to ethically vote during student government elections. They mentioned a lot having a focus on civic duty versus a social image. So, for example, feeling like you're obliged to vote by being a member of a student organization, which would be part of the civic duty, versus following societal norms that you may be judged for not voting. So that would be, trying to withhold that social image of yourself. And then the next example I have is having the intention to vote for someone who will promote change and utilize ethical conduct. So again, the civic duty versus feeling societal pressure just to put a name down. Like feeling pressure in your student organization, in your group, just to vote for somebody just because. So kind of looking at the intent behind why you're voting and who you're voting for. And then going into that, kind of understanding the difference between intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic motivation. So intrinsic motivation is kind of like that personal reward you're looking for. It's more personal, versus extrinsic motivation is kind of that external factor that's causing you to act. So one example may be voting because you personally believe a candidate is best fit for a position versus voting for outside rewards, such as making others believe you practice pro-social behaviors. So, in simple terms, kind of making yourself look better. Just having that general awareness of it. Next slide. Okay. And going into holding leaders accountable kind of brings into play those ethical characteristics that Tim mentioned earlier. So things like, do the candidates uphold the organization's constitution? That's pretty big because you want somebody that is able to best fit that position and still uphold the rules and the guidelines that your student organization has come up with. Next, do they respect members' rights? That's huge, especially going into, no discrimination, no favoritism. And then also that being part of taking fair practices, making sure that that's a big consideration, that that's something they're doing. And then also looking at making strides to affect change in the organization, as well as presenting appropriate qualifications for the position. Like Tim was mentioning earlier, the competence behind the candidates. Another topic would be, do they encourage collaboration among members to act as a team, or are they just in it for personal gain? And then lastly, being able to question leaders with the right intent when ethical dilemmas arise is key. So again, that questioning to understand their intent and things like that, and to clear up any misconceptions, but just making sure you have the right intent behind it.
Okay, so now we're going to transition a little bit into the more tangible kind of logistic side of holding elections. So elections should be held at an annual set time at the end of each term. And you're going to hear a lot throughout this presentation the term one term. And what that simply refers to is one fall and spring semester, so a full academic year. So it's important to have a set time annually, because that just ensures transparency and it gives candidates ample time to prepare campaign materials, garner support, etc. So candidates should announce their candidacy at least 2 weeks prior to election day. That just gives everyone a fair heads up, so it's not last minute. And then if allowed, some candidates may want to use part of an organization meeting to announce their candidacy, explain their interests and qualifications, answer questions, etc. And this brings up an important question of whether or not candidates are allowed to campaign, or if they're just simply allowed to give a written speech or candidate statement. And throughout this presentation, there's going to be a lot of questions posed. And the reason why is because holding ethical elections and officer transitions isn't just a one-size-fits-all type of thing. Depending on the type of student organization, depending on the size, depending on the leadership, there are lots of different ways to ensure that elections are being held in an ethical way. So one of the things that we're going to do is just throw out questions to get you guys really thinking about what is best for your student organization. So that's why throughout this presentation, you might be seeing a lot of questions. Okay, so some student organizations allow officers to hold positions until they graduate, step down, or are challenged. Other student organizations only allow officers to hold their positions for one term, which refers to one academic year, as I mentioned. So this is another question that really just depends on your student organization and what you want to do. But it's important to have a plan in place. This isn't something that Like, for example, if someone got sick and had to step down or go home, etc., it shouldn't be a question of, well, what do we do now? The details of this and a plan should be in place prior to that. So that's just another question that you need to think about of, if, for example, a vice president halfway through the fall semester say that they got sick or had to go home or transferred, whatever it may be, are you comfortable, simply delegating those responsibilities and waiting until you were normally going to have annual elections, or are you going to hold the special election and elect a new vice president? We can go to the next slide. And then that leads us to the voting and approval process. So first, who is allowed to vote? Are all members allowed to vote? Are only executive members allowed? Are only active members allowed? Are outgoing seniors allowed to vote? And if so, are they allowed to vote for their own position? So for example, if I'm the outgoing, let's say, vice president, am I allowed to vote for the incoming vice president? Those are all questions that your student organization needs to ask and then needs to answer and decide. Some student organizations don't require membership at meetings. So some student organizations really have kind of a core number of students who are the active members, and then there are a lot of non-active members. So if you're holding an election, are non-active members who really haven't attended any meetings, are they allowed to vote, or are only active members allowed to vote? All questions that you need to ask yourself. And then, are candidates required to have held membership for a certain period of time? Do they need to be able to demonstrate some sort of competency? It is encouraged to ensure that candidates have retained membership at that student organization for at least one semester. That just ensures that they really understand the mission and the structure and just the whole student organization as a whole, because they have that semester of experience. So that is something that we recommend. And then some student organizations may want to elect a chair who oversees the election. And this most of the time refers to large student organizations. With smaller student organizations like Change and some other student organizations, there may not be necessarily a need for a chair. But if there is a chair in place, then will the chair get to vote, or will they be required as a tiebreaker? And you see this even in the United States Senate. If there is a tie in the Senate, then the vice president comes in and then he casts a vote as the tiebreaker. So that's just an example of that in our government. And then, is a quorum required? And a quorum just refers to establishing a minimum number of voters in order to hold the election. So say, for example, just to make the math easy, if you have a student organization with 100 members, but on election day only 20 members show up and vote, was it really a fair process, and does the candidate who won really represent the student organization if only 20% of the organization voted? So putting a quorum in place simply make sure that there is a number needed to validate that election. And then there are a lot of details in holding elections, and this was something, as I was doing research into this, there were so many details that came up that I hadn't even thought about with holding elections. And one of them is simply, is it going to be a simple majority or a 2/3 majority? And I noticed that 2/3 majority in terms of student organizations is actually very popular. So simple majority, of course, refers to if it's 51-49, then the candidate with 51 votes would win. A 2/3 majority is just what it sounds. It requires at least 2/3 of the votes to be for one specific candidate. And the whole point of a 2/3 majority is to ensure that the candidate that won has an overwhelming majority and is really supported by the student organization. Because if you have a candidate who won by one vote, then essentially half of the student organization may not support their candidacy. But of course, the catch with the 2/3 majority is that when you have really competitive elections or multiple people running, it can be very difficult to achieve that 2/3 margin. So again, depending on the size of your student organization, the specific elections, and what your student organization does, that's just something that you'll have to decide for yourself. And then next is to look at how ballots are cast. So are elections held online or in person, maybe at a meeting? Are secret ballots, open ballots, or a hand system utilized? I don't know too many student organizations that utilize a hand system anymore, but I know some do. And secret ballots, are often encouraged just to keep choices confidential and to avoid peer pressure. So that leads us to ensuring a smooth transition. And this is really one of the most important parts of the election process. And there are several different ways to ensure a smooth transition. One of the most important is to just focus on the conversation aspect. So to make sure that incoming officers have time to speak and really get to know the outgoing officers. So the election should never be held on the last meeting of the semester, where incoming officers are elected, and then that's the last meeting that outgoing officers are going to attend. Ideally, incoming officers should be elected with ample time to shadow outgoing officers. And if there is a structure in place, this just ensures the same methods are used, which may be an easier adjustment for the organization. And everyone has a different leadership style. So when you're talking about these leadership positions, no two people are the same, and that's totally fine. And it's obviously good to have a diversified leadership and different leadership skills. But when you place an emphasis and encourage shadowing, that just helps it to be a smoother transition for the student organization as a whole, so that the structure is more kept in place in terms of traditions, etc. And then lastly, it's important to evaluate goals with both the incoming and outcoming officers. And this can be done through utilizing debrief meetings and strategic planning sessions, which leads us to the next slide. So the whole purpose of a debrief meeting is to ask the question, were goals met? And then the purpose of a strategic planning session is to ask, what are our goals for the next year? So debrief meetings occur after the fact, and strategic planning sessions occur before the fact. So with a debrief meeting, there are a lot of ways to answer the question, were our goals met? One of the most popular ways in business is to utilize a SWOT analysis. So SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So strengths and weaknesses has an internal origin, and then opportunities and threats has an external origin. So strengths, what do we do well? Weaknesses, what can we improve on? Opportunities could be an example of that could be maybe the market's growing for what specifically your student organization does. It could be opportunities to better recruit, etc. And then threats, it could be, just for example, in regards to student organizations, maybe member-to-member connection over the summer. It could be possibly a decrease in funding. It's really just trying to best prepare for any possible threats to your student organization. And then with the strategic planning session, it's just asking the question, what are our goals for the next year? So it can be conducting programs, it could be planning events, it could be your recruitment strategy to gain new members. And regardless of what it is, it's important to establish a timeline. And just like everything else we've discussed, it's important to include this in your constitution. And some student organizations call that their bylaws. Some, may simply call it rules, but whatever type of document you have that outlines your student organization, it should include the timeline that's created in the strategic planning session. And strategic planning sessions usually occur at either the end of the previous school year or the beginning of the new school year. So for example, a strategic planning session for this upcoming school year, fall 2020. If you were to have it at the beginning of the school year, it would be, if classes start on a Wednesday, you would likely have that strategic planning session on either the Monday or Tuesday prior. So that way, all of your members are, or at least the far majority of your members are in town, but classes haven't started yet. But it's actually best to have your strategic planning session at the end of the previous year. So that would mean having a strategic planning session right now near the end of April for next year. And then that way it can include both incoming officers and outgoing officers. So again, you can have a focus on that conversation of, okay, how did we do this in the past? How can we improve it? Kind of what worked for us and what didn't.
Thanks so much. I also wanted to mention a little bit about how TigerQuest can support these election processes that are anonymous voting. You can also adapt it to any way that your organization typically does elections. And it's also pretty easy to troubleshoot if you host your elections on TigerQuest. The entire staff of the center is available to help troubleshoot your elections. We can look them over for you and help you monitor them in real time. So when you go to TigerQuest, if y'all are familiar with logging into your membership of your organization, you'll click Manage Organization, and in the left-hand menu, click Elections. So that'll get you to the elections portion of TigerQuest, and you can set up an election for your organization there and create parameters for it as well, which we'll see on the next slide. So here's kind of an example election. So you can toggle active or inactive election. You can include instructions. So for example, you can reinforce that you'll be having a campaign period, and then this election will occur after that campaign period. How students can interact with the election and with the candidates as well. You can create ballots. The really fun thing about TigerQuest is that you can both elect people in different roles, like president and treasurer here. And then you can also vote for different amendments. You can collect information from a survey, and you can also kind of adapt it to your needs. You'll also be able to see results in real time. These will be anonymous. So you can see the percentage based on the total number of votes cast or the total number of voters. And when you export them, it won't show who's voting for who. So it'll keep that secrecy as well. Another option is that, like Tim mentioned earlier, if you have specific members who should be able to or should not be able to vote, for example, if I was a senior and I was leaving, the manager for the elections could create a list of students who are allowed to vote and exclude me if I wasn't allowed to vote for my own position. And also we can help you set that up. So publishing options, like elsewhere in TigerQuest, you'll only be able to use this election link. You can't use the link in the address bar, but this will also allow you to display an alert on the organization homepage when the election is active. So you can have it open, for example, right now when we're meeting virtually, we could have an election and all of our members could vote if they have an internet connection. So. Additionally, after elections are finished, make sure to update your officer positions in TigerQuest. Again, you'll go to that management page and then click roster on the left-hand screen. Organizations must have a primary contact. You can see that I'm the primary contact for this example right here. If you don't have a primary contact, you won't receive messaging from our office, and that's really important for funding, for information like this, re-registration, awards, and workshops. So if you cannot access this feature, and if you do not currently have a primary contact set, please email our office or just email me directly and we can help you fix this issue.
Perfect. So Change represents Clemson Student Ethics Committee, but we also represent the student voice for the Rutland Institute for Ethics. And the Rutland Institute is a department under the provost office at Clemson, and we're located in Hardin Hall. And the Rutland Institute actually released a decision-making model that was put together and approved by Clemson's faculty, and it's called the STAR decision-making model. STAR is an acronym. It stands for Stop, Test, Act, and then Reflect. And it's really important to have a decision-making model that you're able to utilize whenever ethical dilemmas come up in regards to elections, officer transitions, your student organization, or just life in general, whether it's related to schoolwork and academics or not. So I'm going to very, very briefly just skim through this model. And then there's going to be a link to the decision-making model on the Rutland Institute's website where you can look for more information or to contact someone if you have questions. So the first step of the STAR model is to stop. And whenever an ethical dilemma occurs, you really want to recognize what the problem is, what are the issues surrounding it, and then who all it affects. So when you see that aspect of identify the stakeholders, that's really just what it refers to. Who all is involved and who does this dilemma affect? And then you want to develop at least 3 solutions. So, solution A could be do nothing. That's usually always an option. And then solution B, solution C. So then once you have your 3 solutions or answers to the dilemma, you move on to the test phase of the decision-making model. So there are several different tests. There's the harm test. Does this option do less harm than the alternatives, excuse me. The legality test, is this option legal? The precedent test, does this option set a precedent, or is there a precedent already set? The respect test, what would someone you respect or hold in high regard say if he or she learned of this option? So just think about it as if there's someone that you hold in high regard, whether it's maybe your mom, your dad, brother, sister, coach, teacher, etc., what would they think if I did blank, if I did this decision, if this was the outcome? The golden rule test, would I still think would I still think this was a good option? If I were one of those adversely affected by it, how would I want to be treated? So if I was on the other side of this decision, would I still do it? And then the peer or colleague test, what would my peers or colleagues say when I describe the program and suggest blank solution, whatever solution that is? So you want to run all 3 solutions through at least 3 of those tests. So it could be, for example, harm test, legality test, and then respect test. So you get your solution, and then you ask yourself, does this option do less harm than the other options in terms of all of the stakeholders, everyone involved? Is this option even legal? And then, what would I think of this option if I were on the other side of it? That'd be the golden rule test. So for all 3 solutions, you want to ask yourself at least 3 of those tests, preferably all of them if that's an option. And then once you do that, that moves you on to the next part of the model, which is ACT. So this is where with the insight that you've gained from running it through the test phase, you make a decision and then act upon that decision. And then once you've done that, you reflect. So after the decision has been made, you just take a minute and you really just reflect back and you ask yourself, was that truly the best decision that was made? And then if it wasn't, you try to adapt and modify your decision to ensure a more positive outcome. And again, the link is at the bottom there, and you can just easily remember it is clemson.edu/ethics, and then you'll be able to find the STAR decision-making model and some more information about it on our website.
And I wanted to highlight another program that the Rutland Institute for Ethics runs. It's known as Dr. Dilemma. And the neat thing about this is it remains completely anonymous. So it's actually a forum page that allows students to ask questions about an ethical issue affecting their lives. And like Tim said, it doesn't have to be completely academic. It could be your personal life, things like that. So it's actually run by a Clemson professor, Dr. Brooks Brown. She has a background in law and justice and experience with ethics as well. So she actually responds to submissions and provides suggestions, plans of actions, etc. So there are some different examples that can be found on the website for the Rutland Institute. So it's just the clemson.edu/ethics/dilemma. And then also some are posted to our Facebook page. So, different examples such as different ethical dilemmas students have had to go through, such as, issues with classmates cheating or borrowing information that's not theirs and things like that. So a really helpful tool.
And then lastly, I just want to highlight very quickly how to get involved with Change if you're interested. So Change is actually accepting membership applications for next school year. So if you have a passion for ethics, if you want to learn more about ethics, or if you simply want to gain some leadership experience, we have a lot of really cool leadership opportunities and just opportunities to truly make a difference on Clemson's campus. So you can visit our website, clemson.edu/ethics/change to learn more about who we are, what we do, and how to apply. And then both my information and Landon's contact information is at the end as well. And then lastly, on the PowerPoint, we've included our references and some helpful resources to where if you have any questions about anything that we've said, or if you want to look at where we got the information from, and then some other additional resources, all of that is listed there as well.
Thank you, Tim and Landon, for presenting this information for us today. And thank you everyone for attending. Again, this is our contact information. Please reach out to any of us if you have any questions about this presentation, about Change, or about your election processes. And also, thank you for attending. I appreciate your time.